AI feels like it belongs to everyone. It is in your browser, in your phone, in your search results, your email, your spreadsheets, your customer service interactions. It feels ambient, distributed, democratic. That feeling is an illusion. Beneath every AI product that reaches mass adoption, there is a capital structure, ownership relationships, infrastructure concentration. The question of who controls artificial intelligence is not philosophical, it is structural, and the answer is far more concentrated than the public narrative suggests. This is not a story about algorithms, benchmarks, or research papers. It is a story about who owns the infrastructure that makes AI possible at scale, who controls the compute, who controls distribution, who controls capital allocation, deciding which systems get built, and which never leave the lab. Because in every technology revolution, the entity that controlled the infrastructure, not the application, captured the long-term value. AI will not be different. The only question is who holds the infrastructure, this time, and what that concentration means for everyone else. To understand AI ownership, you have to understand what AI requires to function at scale, not in theory. In practice, a frontier model does not exist in isolation. It lives inside a stack of dependencies, and every dependency has an owner. At the foundation sits compute, hardware, networking, cooling, power, capital-intensive, highly concentrated. Above that sits cloud, the platforms that sell access to compute on demand. 3 companies, AWS, Azure and Google Cloud, dominate that layer. Above that sits the model layer, the foundation models that applications are built on. It looks more distributed, but at the frontier, it is not. Above that sits the application layer, the products users actually touch. This layer looks competitive. It is competitive. But application competition only matters if the layers beneath are open. They are not. And consolidation at the infrastructure layer determines who wins everywhere above it. Start at compute, because this is where ownership begins. The physical infrastructure of AI, data centers, GPU clusters, networking fabric, requires capital at a scale that eliminates most participants before they start. A hyperscale training facility requires billions in capital expenditure before it generates $1 of revenue. Servers, networking, power, buildings, land, cooling. This is not a market you disrupt with a better product. It is defined by capital depth, operational scale, and time. Fewer than 10 entities have deployed this at meaningful scale. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Meta, Oracle, and a small number of sovereign infrastructure projects in the Gulf. Everyone else rents from this group. Startups, enterprises, research institutions, tenants in infrastructure they do not own, and tenants do not set the terms. But compute concentration is only the beginning. The deeper control sits one layer above it. Now consider the model layer, because this is where the narrative of openness becomes most misleading. The public conversation emphasizes competition, open source releases, and rapid capability improvement. Part of that is true, but the frontier, the leading edge of capability, is controlled by a very small group. OpenAI, Google DeepMind, Anthropic, Meta AI, and a few others. And critically, frontier models are not independent entities. They are embedded in the capital structures of the hyperscalers. OpenAI's dependency on Microsoft Azure is not a vendor relationship. It is a structural dependency that shapes product decisions, deployment constraints, and strategic direction. Google DeepMind operates inside Google's infrastructure stack. Anthropic has deep capital relationships with both Google and Amazon. Meta builds on its own infrastructure. These are not separate competitive arenas. They are vertically integrated capital structures with the appearance of independent competition. When Microsoft invests in OpenAI, It is not simply funding a partner. It is ensuring that the most capable external model runs on Microsoft infrastructure. Every API call becomes Azure revenue. The developer ecosystem building on top becomes distribution for Microsoft. This is not a conspiracy. It is rational capital allocation. But it creates a structural reality the open innovation narrative does not capture. And this is where the story breaks. Because capability without distribution is not power. Distribution is the layer most people never think about. And it is the layer that converts AI capability into economic value at scale. Building a capable model solves a technical problem. Reaching users at scale solves a different problem entirely. Distribution in the AI economy is not neutral. It is controlled by the same entities that control the infrastructure. Microsoft has integrated AI into Windows, Office, Teams, LinkedIn, GitHub, and Bing. Hundreds of millions of enterprise users, already inside that surface. Google has integrated AI into Search, Gmail, Docs, Maps, Android, and Chrome. The distribution surface is measured in billions of users. Meta has integrated AI into Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger. Another surface measured in billions. Apple has integrated AI into iOS, and the core operating system of one of the most valuable hardware ecosystems on Earth. These are not marketing advantages. They are structural distribution moats built over decades, and hundreds of billions of dollars. An independent AI company can have a better model and still face one question. How do you reach users at scale without paying for distribution through the very platforms you are competing against? That asymmetry is not temporary. It is architectural. Compute, models, distribution. 3 layers, 3 concentrations, all converging in the same hands. This creates a dynamic that has a name in economic analysis: vertical integration. And vertically integrated industries do not behave like competitive markets. They behave like systems where the integrated player captures value at every layer simultaneously. When Microsoft sells an AI feature in Office 365, it captures revenue from the subscription, from the Azure compute running the model, from the OpenAI API call embedded in the product, and from the data generated by user interaction that trains its next generation of systems. Every transaction flows through multiple layers of Microsoft ownership. Google captures search revenue, cloud revenue, advertising revenue enhanced by AI targeting, and user data that trains the next generation of models. The value loop is closed. External participants, independent AI companies, enterprise customers, developers, generate value for the ecosystem, and the landlords capture the rent. In 2024, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta collectively announced capital expenditure plans exceeding $300 billion directed at AI infrastructure. $300 billion in a single year, from 4 companies. This is not a temporary spike. It is a structural commitment to maintain infrastructure advantages that no new entrant can replicate without matching both the capital and the operational depth simultaneously. More infrastructure trains better models. Better models attract more users. More users generate more revenue. More revenue buys more infrastructure. The loop closes, and it compounds. This dynamic has a historical parallel worth examining. In the early decades of the Internet, the dominant narrative was that the web was open, decentralized, and resistant to monopolization. That narrative was accurate at the application layer, but the infrastructure layer consolidated rapidly. The physical internet, the backbone networks, the data centers, then cloud consolidated into 3 providers. Mobile operating systems consolidated into 2. Search consolidated into 1 dominant player in most markets. The open application layer generated enormous innovation. The consolidated infrastructure layer captured enormous value. AI is following the same structural pattern. The application layer is genuinely competitive. Thousands of companies are building AI products, but they are building on infrastructure they do not own, and the entities that own the infrastructure are building competing applications at every layer above them. Tenants do not set the terms. And here is the structural risk the industry prefers not to discuss. When infrastructure capital and distribution concentrate in the same hands, markets do not behave competitively. They behave predictably. The integrated player sets the price of compute for its competitors. It controls the distribution surface those competitors depend on to reach users. It invests in the model companies its competitors rely on for capability. And it captures data from every interaction flowing through its infrastructure. Data that trains the next generation of systems competing against the very tenants generating that data. This is not speculation. It is the operational reality of the current AI landscape. Regulatory bodies in the United States, the European Union, and the United Kingdom are beginning to examine these dynamics. Not because the technology is harmful, but because the structural concentration raises questions that competition law was designed to address. When the same entity is simultaneously the infrastructure provider, the model investor, the distribution platform, and the competing application developer, the structural questions are significant. Regulatory processes move slowly. Infrastructure consolidation moves quickly. The antitrust dimension of AI ownership is not a peripheral concern. It is a structural feature of the landscape that will shape the industry for years. Now zoom out. This is not just corporate. It is national. AI infrastructure ownership is not evenly distributed across nations. It is concentrated in the United States, and to a lesser extent, in a small number of allied jurisdictions. The compute infrastructure powering frontier AI models is primarily located in American data centers, owned by American companies, subject to American regulation. Nations that depend on American cloud providers for the compute running their government systems, their financial infrastructure, their research institutions are structurally dependent in ways that carry significant long-term implications. The data generated by a nation's citizens, processed on foreign-owned infrastructure, stored in foreign-controlled data centers, is data subject to foreign legal jurisdiction, foreign intelligence access, foreign policy leverage. This is why sovereign AI has emerged as a policy priority across Europe, the Gulf states, India, Japan, and Southeast Asia. Not because these nations expect to compete with OpenAI or Google DeepMind at the frontier, but because they understand that dependence on foreign infrastructure is a strategic vulnerability. Nations that recognize this late will find themselves as tenants in someone else's system, with all the constraints that entails. Now consider the implications for capital allocation. The companies with the deepest infrastructure positions are not simply technology companies. They are infrastructure utilities with technology characteristics. Microsoft, Google, and Amazon are not primarily valued as AI companies. They are diversified infrastructure businesses that happen to be the dominant platforms for AI deployment. Their AI investments are capital deployments into infrastructure that generates returns at multiple layers simultaneously. The independent model companies occupy a more complex position. A model company structurally dependent on a single cloud provider for compute is not an independent business. It is a product organization operating within someone else's infrastructure. The valuation premium assigned to AI capability must be discounted by the structural dependency that limits its strategic autonomy. The application layer companies face a different challenge. They operate in a genuinely competitive environment, but on infrastructure they do not control. The most durable application layer businesses will be those that build distribution moats of their own. Data advantages, network effects, workflow integration that reduce dependency on the infrastructure owners they compete against. The least durable will be those providing undifferentiated access to underlying AI capabilities without adding structural advantages that justify their position in the value chain. That is where most of the current AI startup ecosystem sits. Step back from the individual companies and the quarterly earnings. Look at the shape of this system from the outside. Fewer than 10 entities globally own the physical infrastructure that makes AI possible at scale. Those same entities are the primary investors in the frontier model companies. Those same entities control the distribution surfaces through which AI reaches the majority of its users. They are simultaneously the landlords, the investors, and the competitors of every company building on their infrastructure. That is a structural concentration of power that has few precedents in the history of technology. It is not permanent. Technology cycles have disrupted concentrations that appeared permanent before, but disruption of infrastructure concentrations requires either a fundamental change in the underlying technology, a shift that makes existing infrastructure obsolete, or a regulatory intervention that forces structural separation. Neither is imminent. This is not accidental. The technology is remarkable, but technology does not determine who captures value. Ownership does. The AI revolution feels open, but ownership was decided before most people realized there was something to own. Tenants do not set the terms. Landlords do, and in the AI economy, the landlords are already in place.